Hello there, my name is Marty, and today we'll be discussing aggregate supply for our final critic assignment. To begin with, I will explain how shifts in aggregate supply can lead to recessions, including an AD/AS model diagram, and then we'll be going over the 2020 semiconductor shortage as a case study to learn more about aggregate supply shocks. So let's begin. First of all, what is aggregate supply? Put simply, aggregate supply is a total quantity of goods and services that producers in an economy are willing and able to supply at different price levels. And then we will talk about our aggregate supply and demand curve. So this curve shows how the correlation between aggregate supply and aggregate demand impact price level and quantity of output. As you can see in our diagram here, the place where aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersect at point A, when you extrapolate that to the x and y axis, that shows our price level and quantity of output. Now, a shift left in the aggregate demand will decrease the price level and the quantity output. Now, let's get into our case study. So, a negative supply side shock could be prevalent in many different sectors, but for our example, we will be discussing the semiconductor shortage and the fallout of this. So, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, some of the world's biggest semiconductor producers, such as Taiwan Semiconductors, had to shut down or run operations at a much lower production level, primarily due to their close proximity to the country of origin of the pandemic, as well as shortages in raw materials that they need and employees, so productivity, labor, everything. Shortages in everything led to a severe lack of semiconductors. Now, the trickle down effect of this was that companies such as NVIDIA, who produce graphics cards for computers and other electronics alike, couldn't obtain the strong semiconductors needed to produce all of their graphics card. This led to a strong supply shock, negative supply shock, might I add, which had insane impacts on the graphics card market. As you can see on my image here on the far right, the average price of a graphics card was selling at about 175 all the way to 230% of its MSRP. And so demand for these graphics cards had stayed level throughout the pandemic. If anything, it actually may have increased due to people staying at home and trying to build more PC rigs for their productivity and gaming purposes, but supply severely decreased, sending prices sky high. Now, as we can see here, the shift left in aggregate supply for GPUs was not accompanied with a shift left in the demand. So what ended up happening was that the price increased from P1 to P2. And in our case, this was about a 2 to 3x increase in price of these graphics cards. At the same time, the quantity of output decreased from Y1 to Y2, furthering this impact. Now, this also has rundown impacts on the Phillips curve. As you can see here, when there's no raw materials to produce graphics cards with, unemployment naturally rises. And at the same time, inflation in the price of these graphics cards also rises, which can be seen with the previous slide's image of graphics card prices. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Here are my sources.